The night Laura asked me to be her Valentine, the city lights were bleeding gold against the glass walls of her penthouse office, and I knew something inside her had already shattered long before I walked in. Laura, a woman who ran our tech empire with an iron will and a gaze that could silence a boardroom, hadn't been herself for weeks. Ever since the headlines broke about her fiancé running off with her biggest competitor, she moved like a ghost inside her own kingdom. I was just Kevin, her operations director, the dependable one, the man who stayed late and spoke little, the one she trusted with numbers but never with her heart. That evening, she stood by the window in a red dress that looked less like celebration and more like armor. "Be my Valentine tonight," she said softly, not turning around. My pulse stuttered. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't seduction. It sounded like a plea. I should have said no. Office rumors were already cruel, but when Laura finally faced me, her eyes usually sharp and commanding were vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. "I don't want to be alone," she added. That was how it started, not with roses or promises, but with the broken people standing too close to the edge of loneliness. I agreed, thinking I was offering kindness. I didn't know I was stepping into a storm. Dinner was quiet at first. The restaurant staff treated her like royalty, yet she barely touched her food. Instead, she asked me questions no CEO had ever asked an employee. "What scares you, Kevin? Have you ever loved someone who didn't choose you back?" I answered honestly, because something in her demanded truth. I told her about the college sweetheart who left me for someone richer, about how I buried myself in work after that. Laura listened like every word mattered. Then she surprised me. "He didn't break my heart," she whispered, fingers tightening around her wine glass. "He broke my pride. I trusted him with everything." Her voice cracked on that last word. Instinctively, I reached across the table. She didn't pull away. That simple touch shifted the air between us. It wasn't about pretending anymore. It felt dangerously real. When we left, snow had started to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the city in something pure. Laura slipped on the icy pavement, and I caught her before she hit the ground. For a second, she was in my arms, breath warm against my neck. "You're always there," she murmured. I didn't have a rehearsed answer. "Because you matter," I said. The words hung between us, heavier than the snowfall. Back at her penthouse, the skyline shimmered behind her like a crown of stars. She kicked off her heels, suddenly less CEO and more woman. "Stay," she said again, but this time, it wasn't loneliness speaking, it was fear of breaking apart once the silence returned. We talked for hours on her living room floor, backs against the couch, sharing stories we'd never told anyone. Laura admitted she felt foolish for loving a man who saw her as a stepping stone. I admitted I'd admired her strength long before she ever noticed me. There was a moment quiet, electric, when she studied my face as if seeing me for the first time. "You would never betray me," she said. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. "Never." And then she kissed me. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was soft, searching, almost hesitant. But when her hands found mine, something shifted inside both of us. The heartbreak she carried didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip. We didn't cross any reckless lines that night, yet intimacy bloomed in the space between confession and comfort. As dawn painted the sky pale pink, Laura rested her head on my shoulder. "What are we doing, Kevin?" she asked. I should have said this was a mistake. I should have reminded her I worked for her. Instead, I said, "Maybe we're choosing something better." She smiled, faint but real, for the first time since the scandal. Laura looked hopeful, and that terrified me because hope meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant she could be hurt again. What I didn't know was that while I was falling for the woman behind the title, she was quietly fighting a different battle altogether. That Valentine's night wasn't just about mending a broken heart. It was the beginning of a truth Laura hadn't yet found the courage to tell me. Truth that would test whether my love was built on admiration or something unbreakable. The weeks that followed felt like a fragile dream. Laura and I kept our connection private, navigating board meetings by day and stolen moments by night. She laughed more. She delegated more. The cold steel-edged people feared began to soften, but there were days she'd suddenly withdraw, pressing a hand to her chest as if steadying herself. I assumed it was stress until I found the medical report tucked inside a folder she'd left in the conference room. My hands trembled as I read the word cardiomyopathy, a serious heart condition. Untreated stress could make it worse. My breath caught. That's when everything made sense. Her exhaustion, her distant stares, the way she sometimes looked at me like she was memorizing my face. She hadn't asked me to be her Valentine because she was weak. She'd asked because she was scared of time running out. When I confronted her gently that night, Laura didn't deny it. Tears slid down her cheeks, silent and stubborn. "I didn't want you to stay out of pity," she said. "You deserve a future without hospital rooms and uncertainty." I took her hands, steady despite the fear raging inside me. "You don't get to decide my future for me," I told her. "If loving you means hospital visits and hard days, then that's the future I choose." She searched my eyes for hesitation and found none. In that moment, the power dynamic that wants to find us disappeared. There was no CEO, no employee, just Laura and Kevin DeHarts, both scarred, choosing each other anyway. Valentine's Day had started as a desperate attempt to outrun loneliness. It ended as a promise neither of us saw coming. Love hadn't saved her from illness. It hadn't erased betrayal, but it gave us something stronger than fear, commitment. And as I held her close, feeling the steady, imperfect rhythm of her heartbeat against my chest, I realized the twist in our story wasn't tragedy. It was that sometimes the person who asks you to stay for one lonely night is secretly asking if you're brave enough to stay forever.